My name is Mark, this is Zen Talk, and today we're talking about Bodhicitta. So, the mind of awakening. The term Bodhicitta literally means that which is conscious, though in a spiritual context, the term then reflects to mean the mind of enlightenment or the thought of enlightened. I'd like to take a time to note that this term does not appear in any of the Theravada sutras or commentaries, and is overall rejected by the Theravada, and is only existent in the Mahayana school of Buddhism. The mind of the Bodhisattva. In Zen, Bodhicitta is considered essential, and without generating it, no Bodhisattva can emerge. Our own transformation from an ordinary human body to a bodhisattva involves two steps. First, the aspiration for enlightenment, which seeks to generate bodhicitta, the enlightened mind, which is the pure, radiant spirit. The first is bodhicitta only in its relative aspect. The second step is the generation of actual bodhicitta, which is the absolute bodhicitta. The life of a bodhisattva only commences with the absolute bodhicitta. The bodhicitta is like an embryo of the Buddha, the Buddhagarbha, that grows towards the full Buddhahood. And I have down here, bodhicitta is enlightenment that isn't yet fully developed. So, generating bodhicitta. Many different lineages have two parts on how to generate bodhicitta, and this is coming from pretty much all of the Mahayana lineages, which would be meditation on the absolute, which is known as vipassana, and meditation on the relative, which is known as metta. Without the absolute, the relative can only degenerate into pity and sentimentality, whereas the absolute without the relative can lead to nihilism and lack of desire to engage other sentient beings for their benefit. So this is a balance that we have to have. Beware of the false bodhisattva. In today's Dharma centers, many Zen students imagine they are a bodhisattva, a kind and gentle, beneficent person who goes around doing good deeds for everyone, trying to save them. Still, this is not what a bodhisattva is. First of all, a bodhisattva has no human features. According to the Shiragama Samadhi Sutra, his body is hard, diamond-like, real, infallible, and indestructible. It does not contain either a belly, a stomach, or excrement, or urine, or bad odors, or any impurity whatsoever. So, what we are talking about here is the transcendent spirit. We're not talking about a flesh and bone person. We're not talking about a kind of attitude or view. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about the transcendent spirit here when we're talking about the bodhisattva. Alright, so cultivation. This is a big one here. The foundation of the bodhisattva is faith, taking refuge, and arousing bodhicitta. Among the many traditional methods for developing uncontrived bodhisattva given in the Mahayana teachings are, and like I said, this is a compilation of what I have come up with, so as to arouse bodhicitta, the main aspect, the four immeasurables, the Brahmavara, contemplation and practice, would be equanimity, again, of a stabilization of mind in face of the fluctuations of the worldly fortunes. So this would be, the world's going to do what the world's going to do, despite what we wish it or want it to be. Equanimity is what we strive to maintain in the ups and downs, the left and right, and the turbulent seas of what we call this worldly existence. Loving kindness, which is known as metta. I think a lot of people have heard about this. So really what this is kind of a cessation of wars. This is the wars of conceptualization. This is also to not bully or coerce others into a particular conceptualization or a particular thought that somebody or you may have. Compassion, also known as karuna. So this is a great compassion, which is to ease the suffering of yourself and others. Now, I'm going to make a point that the first two, the equanimity and loving kindness, this is kind of a cascading waterfall down to the compassion. And I would also say that compassion would be the realization of, the conceptualization of your thought. You're making a object, a materialism of your thinking, of your spiritual aspirations, and they kind of tend to create wars within yourself, wars within our sangha, wars within our community, and we tend to bully and coerce others to oftentimes support our mental conceptualizations, our materialism. And this sort of creating conceptualizations of spiritual objects or spiritual things can lead to the unseating of the mind, especially in the turbulent world, where the world can just completely dump over whatever materialism that you have attached yourself to. So as you can see, this is a cascading waterfall. So the last one, the joy and good fortune of others. Now this is the inner spring of infinite joy. I think in the Christian world, the Apostle Paul said, "Rejoice in those who rejoice, and mourn with those who mourn." And that's a good reflection. So as to aspire Bodhisattva, the Lojong practices is the mind training. And you'll see these more within the Vajrayana, the Tibetan Mahayana Buddhism. Others as equal to self and exchanging self to others, the Tonglen, or the sending and receiving while breathing and practices. Now, sometimes you will see this breathing practice I give you. As you breathe out, you're giving metta, and as you're breathing in, you're receiving metta. You'll see this also in the Theravada practices as well, only with certain sects. And then the second practice would be others as more important, viewing all other sentient beings as having been our mothers in infinite past lives, and the feeling of gratitude for the many occasions in which they have taken care of us. These are two meditation practices you will often find in Vajrayana Buddhism. Like I said, sometimes you'll see this in Theravada, but it's not common. So, lastly, then, to apply the Bodhisattva and achieve enlightenment, it's the repeated paramitras practice cycle with generosity, virtue, patience, effort, meditation, and insight. So, the rise of the true Bodhisattva. Few, if any, make it to the second step. They are still very much attached to their carnal bodies and actually trying to reform them instead of transcend them. They cannot understand that the body is unclean, that it is transient and unsustainable, that is the source of all sinful passions. So by this, people can raise the thought of enlightenment. They can raise the notion of enlightenment. They can raise the first step. But they're still attached, like I said, attached to this body, attached to this rising of skandhas. And so they try to say, they try to reform this, this would be things, you see this all the time in the eating habits, especially with vegetarianism, food where they can only drink pure water. And you also see this in trying to engineer society. A lot of times people get into climate change, or they get into political reforms, or they try to get into all of these mechanisms and engineering aspects of trying to reform the human body and the human experience rather than transcend it. And this is basically a foolish effort because the body is unclean, which means it's mortal, which means it's ever changing, transient, and unsustainable. Things happen. You grow old. The world changes, and it's also full of sinful passions. The drinking, using of drugs, sensational passions. Talking about sex. We're talking about all kinds of passions of the body that arise, and this is why few, if any, and I really mean this. You can have a whole room full of people that generate the first step of the Bodhisattva, and that's wonderful, and you praise that, but few, if any, it's literally, if any, really make it to the second step. Alright, so pitfalls and fake practice. For the Zen student, there are many landmines, pitfalls, and traps that need to be avoided. The first one is the Zazen. This is the notion of seated meditation. And here we have that seated meditation does not make one a bodhisattva. And I don't know how else to say this. You're not going to sit your way to enlightenment. You're not going to sit your way, then suddenly spring up from the zafu and say, aha, eureka, I'm a bodhisattva. Don't happen like that. And the second one would be ceremonies. The bodhisattva ordination ceremony does not make one an awakened bodhisattva. This is more of a public declaration of the student of their intention to generate bodhicitta. But yet how many go through the ceremony and then within hours totally abandon it? Many Zen students fall into unbalanced views and in respects of the absolute and the relative. And as I was pointing out in that last slide, we will see this is going back to the generating a bodhicitta side. Many students fall into an imbalance. They're either too heavy in metta or too heavy in vipassana. And this, like I said, can lead into some really unbalanced thinking, and you see it all the time when people start talking about Zen and Buddhism in internet forums, the unbalance. You also can sometimes go to these Dharma centers, and you'll see the teachers also very unbalanced, pulling mostly to metta. And like I said, metta is that over here we're kind of going back to the four immeasurable, the Brahmaviharas. The metta is the loving kindness. So a lot of people focus only on loving kindness and they sort of forget everything else. Or some people only focus on this breath work and forget all the above. So this creates an imbalance, and unfortunately there are a lot of very poor teachers out there that do not recognize this balance or who do not understand this. And they only tend to focus on one little part here, and then they try to inject that this is the practice. Well, it's not. That's just their conceptualization, their materialistic view of the path. So, like I said, many Zen students fall into the unbalanced views in respects of the absolute and the relative. Also, many Dharma centers engage in politics or social engineering as practice. Yet when we view these practices with the view of the Mahayana, we find them to be false practice and only leads to suffering for oneself and others. And so this is why when you go to a Dharma center, you really need to leave your politics and your thoughts of social engineering at the door. And you're not there to discuss these things. You're there to transcend, right there, transcend them, to just transcend your human body. You cannot, if you're there trying to reform your human body, your human experience, instead of transcending it, I would say you're in the wrong hall. Maybe that sounds like a political party versus a spiritual church. All right, some conclusions here. No teacher, lineage, or practice alone can make one a bodhisattva. And unfortunately, a lot of the Zen teachers kind of treat the Zen school or the Dharma Center like a karate dojo. And they will say things, or they will denigrate other teachers or other lineages to pull students. It kind of becomes the karate club atmosphere within these American Western Zen centers. So no teacher can give you Bodhicitta. No teacher can generate it for you or initiate it in you. Those kind of notions are complete garbage and not supported in the Mahayana. No lineage. This would be any particular school or line of school within Zen can do this. No lineage can claim or has the true practice or the true method. And again, this gets into this karate club kind of talk where my lineage is better than your lineage, or my teacher is better than your teacher, or my teacher comes from this lineage or from that other teacher. That's all karate club stuff, and that's the kind of talk that is completely useless for the practitioner, for you. Who cares who your teacher is? Who cares what lineage you come from or are in? Nobody cares. Because if you cannot generate Bodhicitta and then transform to become the Bodhisattva, who cares? All this is meaningless. And then lastly, no practice alone. And I'm referring more to Zazen, can make one the Bodhisattva. So those who convince themselves that they're going to sit their way to enlightenment or sit their way to become the Bodhisattva, that's an imbalanced view. It's a materialistic view, and it's one that needs to be abandoned. All right, generation of Bodhisattva is the essential energy of the Bodhisattva. Without Bodhicitta, there is no Bodhisattva. There's a lot of times when you go into the Tibetan pujas, as they call them, that's an Indian word for ceremonies, there's a lot of generating of Bodhicitta. Now, in some of the Zen centers, you also have these kind of rituals or energies, which is a lot of chanting and reciting of inspirational verses. I believe like Sandokai, the Mirror of Samadhi, is one that Zen students like to chant or read out loud. And there are also other types of group efforts to generate the Bodhisattva, this essential energy, this mind, the first step, the thought of enlightenment, the mind towards enlightenment, this drive to enlightenment, essential. And then the actualization practice of Bodhisattva is as essential as the thought of it. So many have the thought of Bodhicitta, yet few actualize it. Many are still attached to the carnal body and the materialism of the world. And materialism is, within the spiritual context, is the performance art. The materialism is the performance arts, the ritualistic trappings, and the materialism surrounding a church or a particular view of Buddhism. And that could even be the Buddha statues, that could be the robes, the bibs, the haircuts, all of that stuff. So this really, the Bodhisattva, the cosmic Bodhisattva, the great Bodhisattvas out there, the ones that have already transcended their mortal existence, that have transcended these bodies, they urge you to relinquish and abandon your materialism. Abandon this view that you're going to transform this body, because you're not going to transform this body. You're not going to transform the human condition or experiences. You're not going to modify it. That's just a foolish notion. Abandon it, give it up, relinquish it. So many of the landmines, pitfalls, and traps that can snare Zen students, and it ends the quest towards becoming the Bodhisattva. This is very true, that many Zen students kind of fall victim to these pitfalls and traps and snares. And it's like a rope or a chain that is around their leg, and it just stops them dead in becoming the Bodhisattva and in transcending themselves. And this, a lot of times, this is simply because of a bad teacher or a misunderstandings, or simply lack of sincerity and lack of really understanding what true practice is. It's also engaging in a lot of false practices, in a belief that some performance art, such as still sitting or the recitation of mantras or ceremonies, is going to take them somewhere. And it's not. All that is materialism. And the further you delve into materialism, the further it traps you and ensnares you. And this is why, again, the great bodhisattvas, the cosmic bodhisattvas, the bodhisattvas that some people pray to, the Guanyin or the Kannon, they all urge you to relinquish, abandon, renounce materialism. I don't even know how more else to say this than that. I mean, the bodhisattvas are out there, they say this, they urge you, they plead with you, but many just have deaf ears, no eyes to see, and no mouth to speak the Dharma. So the Path of Zen is about helping you become the Bodhisattva. That's pretty much what I'm doing on this channel, is helping you become the Bodhisattva. Alright, thank you, and please remember to like and subscribe, and you can now support this channel on Patreon. It'll be the link in the first comment below.